It's that time of year again. You got your grass and you've got Easter baskets to fill. But what do you want to put in them? And what are you going to do if you don't want them full of candy? Because you have a sewing machine and I have 8 easy sewing projects with fabric scraps for things that you can make to put in these Easter baskets this year. Take a look at the description below the video. It will show you all 8 projects. It will show you the timestamp for when each project begins, and it will also show you a link if there is a free pattern or a pattern that you can buy in my Etsy shop. But it is super important to know, anyone who is a member of my Sew with Tara Reid membership program can get all of this for free in the membership. Have you ever found a sewing project that makes you even more excited for a holiday than you already were? Well, that is what this cute little bunny drawstring bag is for me when it comes to Easter. And it goes so cute with the little carrot drawstring bag, which I also have a video tutorial for how to make that. So if you want to make both, I'll show you how to do this one now and then check the link below so you can also make these cute little carrots. So let's hop to it and get sewing. Let's start by talking about the supplies. You're going to need 4 pieces of white fabric, 5.5 inches wide by 7 inches high. Then you can download the free template for the bunny ear and also for the bunny face if you don't want to draw your own. Some white fabric for the bunny ear and then any kind of a print. So I'm going to be using this green from my spring barn quilts because I think it's going to be super cute. But you can see I just used a cute yellow scrap that I had here. For this one, I took Thomas the Train fabric from Riley Blake Designs and fussy cut so that the trains were on the ears. The bunny face template, I'm going to be using a heat erasable pen quite a bit. Then you need a way to get this face onto the bag. Here are 2 different ways. This one, I used the heat erasable pen, drew the face on there, and then I embroidered. So to do that, you just need some embroidery floss, needle, everything for embroidery. This one, even easier. I just put the fabric down and I used Sharpie markers. Obviously, fabric pens would work as well. Didn't have any of those on hand. I'm a big fan of using what I have in my space whenever possible. Then some pins. You're going to need a seam ripper to create that drawstring, a safety pin. You're going to need drawstring material, pinking shears, maybe a small screwdriver. I'm going to show you how I use this to get those drawstrings in and cooperating nicely. Then your normal, the mat, rotary cutter, quilting rulers. I also use a small one to do the corners, these 1-inch cutouts, sewing machine, iron, all your basics. So let's get started. I like to put the bunny face onto my fabric before doing anything else. I have created this template. You can download it for free. The link is below the video. And it is the same size as our fabric. So 5.5 wide by 7 inch high. You can put it on a dark or a light background. If you're using most white fabrics, you're going to be able to see through it. If you can't see well enough through it, put it up against a window or put it on a light desk, but this works great for me. If you're going to embroider it, I would just take a heat erasable pen or a pencil and draw very, very lightly. But with the heat erasable pen, once you do your embroidery, you can just hit it with a little bit of heat and any of this pink or whatever color you're using that still might be showing would be gone. So just gonna do that. Draw your guidelines. But I want to show you how it would work with the Sharpie pens because again, and we're not gonna use this one, this is just to show you. I wanted to test this before so that you can see if it's gonna work. So again, this Bic did bleed a little bit and I don't know if it's just the size of it, the intensity of the ink, because this one's a thinner one. But what I did was I just kind of went inside where I wanted that, but see how that's bleeding? It doesn't go too far, but it definitely bleeds. Draw your eyes however you want them. You can do them as big as they are on the template. You can make little kawaii eyes if you like that. You can give them eyelashes. Like, make this your own. You could even just draw your own bunny from in the first place, but I just wanted to give you a template in case you weren't feeling so confident about that. This could be a fun project for kids too. Give them a piece of fabric and let them draw a little bunny face. Now, if you're drawing your own, I recommend you start about 3 inches down from the top. That's going to put the face at a really nice space on your bag. If you put it too high up, it's going to get caught in the in the scrunching of the drawstring. So 3 inches down if you're going to draw your own. Otherwise, I have that positioned for you on the template. So as long as you line your fabric up top and bottom, it's going to be at the right place. So once your face is on, it is time to get rolling. And I have an embroidered face ready to go. So these 4 pieces, 2 are going to be the lining and 2 are going to be the outside. But I just stack all 4 up. You're cutting below the face and not above because we're going to cut out the boxed corner. Now, if you want to just do a flat bag and you want it to go a little bit faster, this is the step that you will skip. So I'm going to draw a 1-inch square in the 2 bottom corners. And again, this is a heat erasable pen, so that pink is going to go away if I don't cut it all off. And then I'm just going to take small, sharp scissors and I'm going to cut those 2 notches out. And I'm just doing all 4 pieces at the same time. So as you move your fabric, you want to make sure you're keeping it all lined up. Obviously, the face is going to be one of the outer fabrics, so we'll just make 2 piles. Now for the lining, we're going to sew all the way down here. We're going to sew across, but leave space for turning. And then we're going to sew all the way for our lining with a 1/4 inch seam. Now we're going to make the box bottom out of this point here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the fabric from the top and pull it out so that I can match these seams. And then the other point in that square that we pulled out is going to match. So it's going to make that bottom perfectly for you. And because this one is so small, I'm not going to press these seams open. I'm just going to put one to one side and the other to the other side. Just put a little clip. And then I'm going to just sew a 1/4 inch from that cut edge. So this cut edge becomes this square bottom. These points right here become the outside of it, and then you're matching the seams. And you do want to make sure on the bottom that you're pushing your seams to the same side. So I don't want to put these this way because then it's going to make it harder to stitch that closed. So you want to make those going in the same direction. And then I'm matching the seam line here, and then I'm just going to sew a 1/4 inch from that edge. Next, we're going to work on our bunny ears. So if you want to do something where you're fussy cutting and you want to know exactly what's on the inside of your ear, go for it. You're going to use your template. Otherwise, you can just put your template down. This is a scrap of white. I'm just going to fold that in half. And just like I did with the cutting those squares, I'm going to cut these all at once. So now we have the 2 green and the 2 white, and we're going to put those right sides together, and we're going to sew the big curve, leave this bottom part open for turning. And make sure you go back and forth at both ends because we are going to be turning this right side out in between a pretty small area. So you want to make sure that the stitching isn't going to pull out as we turn this ear right side out. Now we need to trim the curves on these ears before we turn them so that we can get a nice smooth edge like this on the bunny ear. And my trick is to use pinking shears. And then I always just hold it right over a trash can while I cut. And I love these pinking shears from Fiskars, how they move like that. It's a lot easier on your hand and your thumb. So you're just going to trim all the way around. This is way easier and faster than taking little scissors and going clip, 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 clip. Talk about hard on your hand. You just want to be very careful and slow and make sure you do not cut any of the stitches. So I'm going to do that for both ears. There were 2 supplies I forgot to mention, tweezers and a turning tool. So this is a pretty small area to turn this whole big thing, but don't worry, we can do it. So you're going to get it started and kind of flip that fabric back so you're not just straining on the edge. So see, I'm just working really hard to get the whole thing flipped down. See how that seam is flipped down? And then you can either just try and pull that out, but I like to use tweezers. So I'll stick tweezers in there, I'll hold the edge of the fabric, and I'll just use the tweezers to pull that out. And sometimes you can just kind of open that up, get the tweezers down in there a little bit further, and get a much bigger chunk. And then once you get it that far, you can start to use use a turning tool or a chopstick or whatever you use. Just very slowly and gently run the tool right along the seam to get this all the way turned out so I can see that raw edge so that your shape is ready. And then you're going to iron that flat. I'm going to do the second one while my little mini iron is still heating up. Tweezers, they're not just for eyebrows or splinters. Have you ever used tweezers when you were sewing? I use them to grab bobbin thread sometimes. I use them for this. Okay, before you press it, you just want to look and make sure you have that curve pushed out as well as you can. And I'm going to use a Cricut mini press because these are pretty small presses that we're doing at this point, and it makes it easier to see what I'm doing, a little bit less heat and steam coming at me, and definitely less on my fingers. So I basically have 3 sizes of irons. I have my big Eliso iron. I also have their project iron that's a little more travel size. And then I also use this little baby Cricut a lot too. What kinds of irons do you have? Do you have one that you use for everything? Or have you become an iron collector or heat press collector like me and have different ones for different jobs? Let me know in the comments. Now, the other thing I'm going to do before I get sewing much more is I'm going to make sure I take any heat erasable pen lines off. It's especially important when you're using white because you don't want that showing through. This is our front, obviously, and this is the back. So what is important is that you clip and baste the ears on the back, right sides up. I did it wrong the first time. So these are going to be sewn down like this. So you want to make sure the colored fabric is going to be what is showing when you can see the face, right? So you'll see this is the back lining. We want the white to be there. So now I'm just going to pin these. If you want them a little bit more angled, you can kind of angle them like that. It won't be totally straight. As long as you don't have this down more than 1/4 inch, you will be totally fine putting this together. All right, so I'm going to go baste that on there. Now we've sewn our lining together already. Now it's time to sew the outside. So now we're going to do right sides together. So this is the right side, this is the right side. Flip that over. Lining up these edges. Now we are going to sew all the way down here, all the way across the bottom and all the way up the other side, but not sewing these notches because again, we're going to turn those into the boxed corners. Now we have the outside of the bag. Totally sewn together box corners. The lining, the inside, is ready to go with a hole in the bottom for turning. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to sew around the outside. So we're going to turn the outer bag, so with the ears and the face, right side out. I'm just going to push those corners out. Got the ears, aren't they cute? And we are going to put it the right side into the lining. So basically putting these bags together, right sides together. I'm going to flip this over because we need the ears to stay inside. No ears escaping like that. The ears go in. And we're going to match these seams on the side. Now it is going to be easier to do the drawstring if you open those seams. Always start by putting the 2 sides together and clipping right at that seam. Then if you just kind of pull it like that, the rest should just line up. You just want to make sure you're paying attention to those ears and keep them going straight down as you clip this together. Now we're going to take it to the sewing machine. We're going to sew all the way around the top. No openings necessary because we already have it in the bottom. All the way around the top with a 1/4 inch seam. They would also be really cute to combine with the carrot drawstring bags. So check the link below this video to go see that video as well if you want to make both of them. That make a great little Easter tiered tray display. Or you could put them both in Easter baskets. You could have them for Easter egg hunt prizes. So many ways you can use these. Our next step is to turn this all right side out through that hole in the lining. So now it's popped out like that. This is the outside of the bag and the lining of the bag. Now we need to close this hole. So you can either hand stitch that, or I'm going to just stitch across that really quick with my machine because it's in the bottom of a pretty small bag. It's not a reversible bag, so I don't think it needs to be perfect. So I'm just going to machine stitch there. That's closed. Has a little bit of a bump. Doesn't really matter because again, it's going to be on the inside. So now we're going to push that lining inside the outer bag. And we're going to get this lined up. So we have to press around the top, but you want to get this seam as lined up as possible. You don't want it to be folded over 1/4 inch on either side. So just take your time. It's easier to do where the ears are. You just kind of pull, and that will pull them up. But take your time and get that pulled out. And I usually just press from the inside. So I have that space good. Just press across there. Get those ears nice and flat again. Everything gets a little bit wrinkled as you have it turning inside outside. All right, well, while we have the iron on, I'm just gonna press the rest of the bag a little bit more. Now, I'm going to take this back to the sewing machine and I'm gonna sew really close, like 1/8 inch or less, to the edge. And then I'm going to drop down 5/8 of an inch and I'm going to sew again. That's going to create our drawstring channel. Because this is top stitching, I'm going to do my little trick of pulling up the bobbin thread by lowering the presser foot, lowering the needle, pulling it up, holding that thread, and then pulling. Then I can have both the bobbin and the top thread up on top. Put that under the foot, pull back, and then I'm going to knot. That's going to help me not have a little bird's nest of a knot potentially on the back of my bag. Now I'm coming up on the seam, so I'm going to go forward, back, and forward to reinforce that for the drawstring. Now we're going to use the 5/8 inch mark, and we're going to sew the second stitch around to make our drawstring channel. As I hit those seams, I'm going to go forward and back just to reinforce so that our drawstring works well, and when we pull the threads from the seam, it doesn't mess up the bag. Next step, open up our drawstring channel. So what we are going to do is we are going to very, very carefully take your seam ripper and you're going to open the outside seam between these two stitch lines. Okay, so between here and here, and just the outside. You don't want to open all the way through, so don't jam it in. You're just going to very gently and slowly kind of dig for your first stitch. Sometimes, especially on white, my eyes are getting old. It's hard to do. You don't want to cut the fabric. You just want to find a stitch. Once you get that first stitch, everything gets easier. So just kind of stitch by stitch, get that seam open. Okay, one side's good. Now we're going to do the other side. So that's done. Now we are going to take our 2 drawstrings, or draw ribbons, as it were, and these are 20 inches long. I like to have them extra long and trim them later instead of making it difficult to tie once I get them through. So I'm just going to put one end on a small safety pin. The quilting safety pins are a little bit big for this size bag and drawstring. I'm going to start from either side, and I'm just going to thread that all the way around. And here is where we are going to use the little screwdriver. So sometimes you're pushing your safety pin and it decides to go in between the seam and the thing, so it won't go through. So sometimes if you jiggle it, you can get it to go through. If you can't get it through, what I do is I take the screwdriver and I put it in the channel and I push it up. So it's basically going to hold that seam back. And then you're going to push the safety pin under the screwdriver to get it to go through. I just got really tired of having it take 5 minutes and I came up with that and it works great. Okay, so we got back to the same place we started. Pull that out. I'm going to get the ends even and I'm going to make sure this is pulled all the way out. I don't want to tie it while it's partly drawn. We want that all the way out. Oh, get out there, bunny ear. And then you can tie it wherever you want. As long as this is flat, you can tie it pretty close to the opening so that you don't have super, super long strings, but totally up to you. I usually do it about 1 inch. So we'll cut that off after we do this second one. Now the second one, we're just going to do the same thing, but we're going to start and end on the opposite side. So now those ends are a little bit long. So I'm going to cut them just like 1/4 inch from the knot. And then I got just a really inexpensive bottle of clear nail polish. And then I just put that on the end of ribbons just to help them to not fray. And then when you pull it shut, it makes the ears punch out. Isn't that cute? So here are 3 bunny bags, one with the flat bottom and the fussy cut cute little fabric. That would be really fun if you're making them for specific people to do whatever theme they love or activity. And then when you pull that, those come out and that just lays flat. And then these 2 are boxed bottoms. So they're going to stand up. So if you were going to make these for decor where you just put polyfill in them and you're putting them in maybe a tiered tray or something like that, I would definitely do the box bottom. Also very cute to do the box bottom if you're doing them for gifts. If you're putting them in an Easter basket or you're making a lot, you might want to go with that way. So let me know in the comments which way you're going to go. These are just the sweetest bags. In today's tutorial, we are going to whip up something super sweet for your Easter decor, baskets, or gift giving. How about a cute little drawstring carrot bag that is fully lined? And making it lined makes it honestly easier to sew and more professional look. So let's get started. Let's start with the supplies that you need to make these super cute carrot drawstring bags. And you can, of course, use the same fabric on the outside and the inside like I did with this. So it has the birds and the dots on both sides. But you can also, especially if you're using scraps, do something different. So I have the flowers and these stripes, which I love how they're coming up, kind of gives that grass feel, even though it's aqua, not green. And then I did dots and dots on the inside because that's what I had that was the size. And so for this tutorial, I'm going to use 2 different fabrics. I'm going to use the same for the top. And this one I borrowed from my spring barn quilts because I liked the green and I wanted to do one traditional green. The dots and the birds are from my Happy at Home fabric collection. So obviously we're going to do the orange dots on the outside and then we're going to line it with the little birds. You're really only going to see the lining as you grab things out of there, and even then, not very much, but I like the finished look and it's not hard to do. What we need for this is we need 4 pieces, 3.5 inches by 6 inches, and they can be 4 of the same or 2 and 2. That's going to do your little grass topper. Then you need 4 pieces, 7 inches high by 6 inches wide. And they can either be 4 of the same or 2 and 2. Then you're going to need 2 pieces of string, either twine or a narrow ribbon. This channel is going to be about 1/2 inch, so you don't want to do anything too large. If you want something a little bit bigger, just make sure you make this channel wider so that you're going to be able to fit whatever you want in there. The beauty of sewing, right? You can adjust what you want. I also recommend a turning tool, or you could use like a pen as long as you don't have it open, something to help you when you're turning these to get this point pushed out that isn't going to go through your fabric. Then for this size channel, I recommend a regular size safety pin, not a quilting safety pin. Those are a little bit big. You just need to make sure you have something that's going to fit through that channel. Then this is my secret weapon for getting that safety pin through if it gets stuck, and I'll show you when we put that drawstring in, tweezers. I'm also, if you've watched many of my videos, huge fan of the heat erasable pen. I'm going to be using that, rotary cutter, ruler, mat, and some clips, ironing board, sewing machine, thread. So those are the materials I'm going to use. Let's get started. The first step is going to be to get our carrot fabric, the outside and the lining, to a carrot shape. There are 2 ways to do that. The first way would be to take your fabric, fold it in half, and that's going to help you find the center, and then either line it up on your grid or you can just measure down 1 inch. And this is the outside raw edges, the 2 raw edges together. We're going to measure 1 inch down. And then we're going to take the ruler and we're going to go between that mark and this bottom point at the fold, and we're going to cut. So now we have a carrot shape. So that is one way to do it. You would just repeat that process for the other 3 pieces. Or if you want to do them all at once, and this is usually what I choose to do, you want to make sure you get them lined up really well, as in get all those edges matched Oh, and if you have directional fabric, make sure you have it in the correct direction so that your birds aren't flying upside down inside your carrot. So I have these all lined up. This is the top, this is the bottom. And I'm just going to look at my grid. I'm going to put a little dot 1 inch down on both sides, a little dot at the 3-inch mark, because this is 6 inches wide. And then I'm just going to take my ruler and go in between those dots on both sides, and I'm going to cut all 3 fabrics. I normally will do all 4 at the same time. If your rotary cutter is dull, you're going to have a hard time getting through all 3 of those fabrics. Okay, so we have carrot shapes for the inside, carrot shapes for the outside. We have our 4 tops. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to sew the green to the orange. And you'll notice my green is slightly directional because it has windmills on it. So I'm going to make sure that's going in the right direction. Then I'm just going to fold that down. And I'm just going to grab some clips. I'm going to clip that together. And we are going to sew all 4 of the green pieces on top of the carrot pieces with a 1/4 inch seam. Now we need to press these seams. And one good idea when you're sewing is to just go over your seam before you press it open. That just helps make that flatter. It flattens the stitching and the fabric, and you're going to get an even flatter seam if you just take the time to do that simple press. Then we do want to press towards the carrot section, so in this case the bird. So I'm going to turn it over and then just push forward, and I'm going to press that. And then I'm going to use another one of my favorite tools, which is the quilter's clapper, which is a nice, easy to handle piece of wood. You press the wood down after you press a seam. It helps pull the heat out of that seam and also helps it stay nice and flat. So we're going to do that for all 4 of our seams. So the next thing we're going to do is we are going to put these right side together, and we are going to sew them together. But there's a couple caveats to that. For the outside, we are going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam all the way around. Sometimes when you get these weird angles, it's a little hard to just judge that with your sewing machine. So I'm going to show you a little trick that I like to use sometimes, and that is great to use if you're teaching someone to sew. I'm going to just draw these lines right on there. So all I have to do is follow the lines, and I'm going to know that I'm a 1/4 inch. And I'm using this Riley Blake's 1/4 inch plus ruler, which I just love. So the blue is a 1/4 inch. You don't have to look at the little lines. You just know, okay, if I have that blue edge lined up, and I am literally going to draw that line on. I'm going to do it all the way around. And like I said, this is great if you're teaching someone to sew, or say you have a child that's just learning to sew and they want to make something cute. This is a great project for them. And if you draw these lines, it's going to give them that confidence that they know what they're doing. They know exactly where to turn, where to sew, and they're going to have a good time and have success. And don't worry about what color, because again, this is a heat erasable pen. So here's what happens when we put heat on that. It disappears. Now I'm going to use some fabric clips. You can pin this or clip it, totally up to you. Have you ever tried fabric clips? Are you a fan? When I have to do things that are a little bit more precise, I usually pin. But for something like this, I am a clip girl. Let me know in the comments what you like to do. Now we're going to take the lining. Here is where we get a little bit tricky, and where it's really good idea to draw your lines, no matter how much you've sewn. You know how it's cut like that? From there, these 2 sides, we want it to be sewn with a 1/4 inch seam, because we need it to be the same as the outside for when we sew that top edge together. So I'm going to draw the 1/4 inch on either side. But because this is going to be the lining and it's going to go inside this, and it's so pointy, there's not a lot of room down here, we want a little bit of a bigger seam on the pointed part. We want it to be 3/8 of an inch. So you have 2 different size seam allowances on your lining. That's why I find it definitely easier to draw this on. And you want to leave a few inches open for turning. So I'm just going to not draw on a few inches so that I remember when I'm sewing, oh, stop there, stop there. Stop that, and we're going to take it back to the sewing machine, and we are going to sew both the outside together and the lining together. It is so easy to know where to turn on that tight point when you have it already drawn on there. I'm just going to quickly go over those lines with my iron, and they go away like magic. Plus, I love it. It's so much fun. Next, we need to trim our points because there's very little room here and there's a lot of fabric. So if we didn't trim this, there's no way we would get a decent point so that it would look cute like this, like our carrot. So what we're going to do is we're going to trim pretty close to the stitching, trim down the one side and up the other side. So see, I cut quite a bit off so that now it's going to be a lot easier. You can even do a little bit more. It's going to be a lot easier to get that turned and get a nice point. So we want to trim that on both the outside and the lining. But then remember, down in this angled carrot part, we have very big seam allowances. So I am just going to trim them down a bit too. So it's open from here to here. So I'm not going to trim there because I want to have that fabric to fold under so that I can then sew that together. So I just kind of trim above and below the opening for turning. Now we need to press open these seams. We're just going to press open the green part and down to the edge of the orange. Fold this kind of in half, get that open, do that and press. You've probably noticed I'm using my little Cricut mini press, which is usually for crafting, but I love it for small projects and for small quilt blocks. I use it a lot when I don't need to be pressing big pieces because then you don't have this huge iron in the way. You're not steaming yourself as much. You can really see what you're doing. Next, we are going to turn the outside right side out. This is where I'm going to use this cute little Riley Blake turning tool. You could also use a little dowel rod. You could use the end of a pen, as long as something that's got some point to it, but not pointy. And always, always, always go kind of slowly and kind of rub along those seams, because if you push really hard, this blue thing could end up popping right through your fabric and make you really sad, because then you'd have to create another carrot. So just really gently get that out as much as you can. And then I usually use it to kind of run along those seams, help get those points out. So we have the lining with the hole to turn it right side out, still wrong side out, this right side out. So I'm going to put the lining inside, and it doesn't really matter how it's fitting. Our goal here is to line up the top edge. So we want to line up the seams on both sides and put a clip. So seams and those top raw edges. Then I'm just going to kind of put my fingers like that. And because we did the same seam allowance on the lining and the outer bag on this top part, this lines up perfectly. If you had done a 3/8 inch seam allowance on the lining, you would have had more fabric on the outer bag, and it wouldn't have lined up so nicely. It would have bunched a little bit. So that is why we had two different seam allowances on the lining. So I'm just getting all these raw edges lined up, and then we're going to take this, we're going to take this back to the sewing machine, and we're going to sew all the way around the top. Now we are going to turn this right side out through the hole in the lining. I'm going to use my turning tool again, and I'm going to press the point out on the lining. I'm just going to run it along those seams, get that side out. Now we're going to press all the way around to get these seams opened all the way, and also to turn the seams under on the section that we used for turning. And then you can either hand stitch or machine stitch that closed. Now we are going to take the lining and we are going to put it into the outer bag at that seam on the green. And we're going to press that next. Just want to get a nice crease there. And you know what I like for nice creases. Can top stitch up here if you want to. I usually don't. I just leave it pressed. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to sew, let me just show you, these two channel lines. Now, if you have a sewing machine where you can take the arm off and pretend this is your sewing machine, and you can put this on here and you can go like that, then you're just going to leave the outer bag on the outside and you're going to sew close to this line and then about a 1/2 inch up from that. Two channels like that. But if you have an industrial machine like mine where you can't do that, we're going to draw lines on here and then we're going to turn it inside out so that we can follow those lines. We don't want to follow the lining lines because it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to hit just right on the outside, and we want the outside to look good. So I'm going to again grab my ruler and my heat erasable pen, and I am going to draw where I'm going to sew. So the first one I'm going to do is really close to where that seam line is, barely 1/8 of an inch up. I'm going to draw a line on both sides, which basically is all the way around. And remember, you're going to be able to just hit that with heat and it's going to go away. So don't stress that you're drawing on the outside of your bag. Then we're going to go up a little bit more than 1/2 inch from that line, and we're going to draw that again. So we know where our second line is going to be. And if you want to be even more precise, you can go across that seam to make sure that that line is going to be lined up. So I just do a little bit past the seam and then connect those lines. All right, so again, if you have a sewing machine where you can do this, you're just going to take it like this. You're going to sew on these two lines. And when you get to these two seams, you're going to double back, go back and forth, just to reinforce, because we are going to use a seam ripper and we're going to open that to make our drawstring channel. But because I have the kind of sewing machine where I have to work a little bit harder because I have to work from the inside, I'm going to turn this the opposite direction, and I'm going to have to do this and sew along those lines. Now I've turned my right side out again so that the outside of the bag is up, and I'm just going to quickly iron over the lines that we drew. We just want to get those pen marks off before we put our drawstring in. The next step is to create our channel for our drawstrings. So to do that, you're going to take a seam ripper. This one is my favorite, Cindy's little seam ripper, the owner of Riley Blake, and it fits right on your finger. And what you're going to do is you're going to really gently pull the stitches out of the seam, only of the outer fabric. You don't want the seam open here, just the outer seam. And only in between these stitches that we just did. Just be really patient with this step so that you don't motor through your channel. But that's why we doubled back here, so that these seams are still going to be caught really well. Okay, so we have both sides open. Now we have 2 pieces of twine, and I recommend cutting these 20 inches or a little bit longer. Some people would say to do 15 or 16, but my feeling is have it longer so that it's easy to thread through, easy to tie, and then you can just trim it to the size you want instead of fussing with things that are just about the right size. Plus, you're going to need to put a knot and put it as close to the end as possible. You need to put a knot so that your safety pin has something to hold on to. And I'm going to start on either side, and I'm going to go all the way around. So I'm going to put the twine in and out the same side. It gets tricky on these sides because sometimes it gets caught under that fold. So you can either just try and figure that out, or this is my secret weapon. I keep the pin back a little bit so it's not under that fold. I put the tweezers in there, I grab the pin, and I get it through. It saves you a lot of time. Then you're just going to push it back a little bit so that you can get it back into that channel and keep going. It took me a while to figure out how to do that. I just get so frustrated with my pin getting stuck under that fold until I came up with my tweezer method. So we're back to where we started. So this time I'm going to pull it all the way out. I'm going to take it off. I'm going to cut that knot off. I'm going to even up the ends of that thread. Pull it so that it's even and so that it's fully apart. And then I'm going to knot it wherever I want it. As long as you have that flat, you really don't need a lot more length on the outside. So see, we had lots to work with, and now I can just trim that. Now I'm going to do the same thing starting on the opposite side, because you want 2 drawstrings, but you want each of them to start on opposite sides, so you can go like that. Have you ever used tweezers for this? I just use my hand to push that out. You want to make sure it's all the way open before you decide where to put your knot. So what would you use these carrots for? You could put treats in there and put them in an Easter basket. You could just fill them with a little stuffing and use it as a decoration. In today's tutorial, it's all about kids and it's all about the coloring. Or if you like to color, you go for it. Make one of these for yourself. There should be no age limit on these. I apologize. With a 1/4 yard of fabric, you can make 2 of these holders that holds a 3x5 little notepad that you can find pretty much anywhere and 6 crayons. Or you can make a really long one that holds 16 crayons and the notepad if you use the entire 1/4 yard for one project. So I'm going to walk you through how to do these little ones. And then if you want to make it bigger, you're just going to double it up and have a lot of fun. Let's get started with our materials. This is a pretty simple project, so you don't need very much. Once we have this all sewn together, you're going to need a memo book. I use these 3x5 inches and then some crayons, but we can set those aside for now. You're going to need fabric, rotary cutter, pins or clips, 2-inch piece of hook and loop, also known as Velcro, a piece of fabric that is 5.5 by 1.5 to make our closure tab, and then my favorite, heat erasable pen for marking those lines. You can also use a chalk marker or a pencil, totally your choice, but I like how easy these are to see when you draw on the fabric. And that is going to come off with heat. So once you hit the iron to that, it is completely gone. No one will ever know it was there. And then also I like to use a little square ruler. You can use any kind of ruler that you have, but I like to use this one to do my markings. It's a great size, and I will show you that in a little bit. Now this is a 1/4 yard of fabric. I cut it the full width of fabric, then I cut the selvage off one end and I cut it in half. This way we can make 2 of these little crayon carriers out of 1/4 yard of fabric, making it a really economical thing to use if you're making multiple. Because this is a tutorial for the easiest way to do this, you definitely want to use a solid, just a random print like dots or things like stripes, things like that, or something that's not going to look super directional. And here is why. This would be so cute for a little crayon thing, right? When you sew it together, this is going to be the outside, and then we're going to fold this up to put all the crayons and everything, and the inside is going to be completely upside down. This is possible, but that's going to be a whole nother thing. And the first step is to just take this fabric and fold it the long way, right sides together, and then you can either clip or pin these 2 sides, and then we're going to do the same thing with this little closure. So we're just going to fold that in half, and we're going to sew down these 2 sides. And this one, I'm just going to finger press, which basically means push it with your fingers. And I'm just going to put 1 pin in that. Now we're going to go sew these together. I'm just going to sew down each side with a 1/4 inch seam. The next step is to turn both of these right side out. Now I want to cut off a teeny bit of the fabric right there, but make sure you do not cut your stitching. So it's kind of like cutting a corner, but you're only cutting one part because we did a fold instead of stitching that other side. And this one, because it's big, really easy to turn right side out. We're going to grab the ironing board in a minute. This one, because it's so skinny, this is 1 inch in between the stitching. It is a bit harder to turn right side out, but I'm going to show you my tip. So the first thing is you want to turn it so that the seam is folded down, right? You don't want to put too much strain on that seam. And then you can just see what you can do with your fingers. But I also like to grab tweezers. And so I will put the tweezers as far in there as I can. I got it. See how it's pinched in there? Now I'm going to keep that pinched and I'm just going to pull that out like that. Okay, now we have to get the corners out. So I'm going to use this handy dandy tool, turning tool in a cute little Riley Blake bird. And the key is just to kind of run it along the seam and be really gentle at those corners because you don't want to push through the fabric. Now, if you don't have something like this, you can use other tools. So you could use a pen as long as you don't have it open because you don't want to be drawing on the inside of your fabric. If you're really careful, you can also use this pointy tip from the cleaning brush that came with your sewing machine. But you have to be really, really gentle because it's quite pointy and it's going to be pretty easy to poke through that fabric, but that does work. You can also use a chopstick, basically anything with a little bit of a point can be used to push it out, but you just want to be gentle. But look at what great points we have on that. Next step involves a little bit of ironing. You're going to push these seams out. We want to have it nice and flat and the seams to be on the edge. And then this is just a fold, but we do want to press that. So everything is nice and flat. The next step, we're going to press this raw edge under about 3/8 of an inch. It doesn't have to be exact. This is one of those beautiful projects. If you do a 1/2 inch, you're going to be totally fine. So once we get that finger pressed, we're just going to take the iron and press that closed. Now we're going to press this one as well. We don't have to fold this end under because it is going to get tucked in here. So yay for that. We just have to make sure it's nice and flat and even. So while we have the iron on, we're going to press this up, which is going to be the start of making our pockets. And we are going to fold it up 2 3/4 inches. So what I'm going to do, and don't iron on your quilting rulers, but it's great to do this. I'm going to put my ruler up here, and then I'm just going to fold this up and see what happens. Well, that's too far. So I'm going to line this edge up with 2 3/4, and then I'm just going to push the ruler until I can feel that the ruler is at this fold. Take my ruler out, and as long as these sides are straight, you're going to have a nice consistent 2 3/4 inches all the way across. So I'm just going to press this in place. Now we're going to take our hook and loop. So we have the scratchy side, which is the hook, and the soft side, which is the loop. And they, as you know, stick together very nicely, and kids can do it. So the soft side is going to go on the back of the crayon container, and the scratchy / hook side is going to go on our tab. And the reason for that, let me show you the one that's done, is that if someone has this laying on their lap, you don't want the scratchy part of the Velcro on their lap because if they're wearing something knit, that could attach and mess up their clothes. So really important to put the soft side on the back and the scratchy side over here because that's always going to be face up when they are using this pack. It's the little things, right? So I'm just going to head over to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew this onto the tab. And then I will be right back and show you how to figure out exactly where that goes on the back of this fabric. You want to use a pretty small stitch length. I'm going to be using a 1.8 because this is a small piece and we're just going to be going around it in a box. You also want to make sure you pull up your bobbin thread because the front of the closure tab is where the bobbin thread is going to be. So if you skip this step and end up with one of those little bird nests at the beginning of your stitching, it is going to show. So let me remind you how to do that. You're going to put it pretty close to the folded edge because this raw edge is going to go inside the crayon pack. So I'm just going to put a clip right here just to keep it in place. Okay, if you haven't seen this before, let's do it. So you're going to hold your top thread. You're going to put your presser foot down. You're going to lower your needle, still holding this thread, lift your needle, give it a little tug, and grab that bobbin thread. This is going to stop it from getting sucked under when you get started. So then you're going to put both of these threads under the foot and you're going to hold them tight while you start. So do like 2 to 3 stitches, keep holding them, and then do 2 to 3 backwards. So that locks those in place. Now these should not get sucked under anymore, so you can let that go. And now we are just going to sew all the way around this loop to attach it to the closure. And you can see we didn't have a big old bird's nest back there. Just need to cut that off. Now, if you didn't want this to show, you could just match your bobbin thread to the main color of your fabric. I'm going to show you how to get the soft side on the back of the crayon pack. The next step is to decide where our closure goes and then make sure that the loop gets lined up properly on the back of the case. But before we do that, I want to show you one other thing that I forgot to mention when I just folded that up and ironed it. This is the open end. And this is folded, so the closure is going to go here because it gets tucked in. That means that this notepad is going to go on the left. And that is because it's going to roll up nicely and close when the notepad is on the opposite side of the closure. This is the one that I did that way. So you just flip, flip, perfect, right? This was the second one I did. This was the first one I did when I hadn't thought through that part, and I put the closure on the same side as the notepad. Well, if you flip, that doesn't work. So you end up having to like do this really weird flip. Yeah, it's just not good. So the closure is always the opposite side of the notepad. Now, being a right-handed daughter of 2 left-handed parents, I want to tell you how to do it the opposite way. If you want this to be on the right, all you do is you put your opening on the left and you would fold it up in that direction. That way your closure's over here, your notepad's over here. So now you know how to do it both directions. We're gonna stick with what I already did. Find the center, and you can either measure with a ruler or you can just use your grid if you have it on your mat. So I'm going to fold this back and I'm just gonna place this in here, 2 1/4 inches. So we have like 2 1/4 on either side. Have it in about 1/2 inch, and I'm going to pin that in place. And I'm going to do it from both sides just so that it stays straight. Now we're going to turn it over. So this is the back, and you're going to measure 2 3/4 inches from this side. So I'm just going to put this ruler down, and you can draw a mark or you can just leave your ruler sitting on there. And that is what you're going to use to line up the edge of the loop. Now I'm going to keep that there, and just to make sure I have it lined up well, I'm going to fold this back, making sure this edge and this edge are lined up, and I'm going to very quickly realize, nope, it's too far up. So I'm just going to scooch it down so that that is all lined up, so that it's going to hit very nicely when you go to close. Hold that down, fold that back, pick this up, because the folded part is under there, or we could have just moved that back, but it's easier to see that way. Now I'm going to put a pin in here so I know exactly where I want this to be. And I do kind of put it to one side so I can start sewing here. And now I'm just going to go sew that on just like we sewed the other half on. We have our closure pinned. We have our loop on the back. So we're going to keep it where the hook is facing up. We're going to fold this back up. And the next step is to sew all the way down from here down to here. We're going to go across the bottom and up to here. You know what's no fun? When you forget to hit record. I forgot to hit record as I was sewing that, but thankfully it was something simple, so I think you can get it. So I started up here, and then I doubled back here, and I sewed all the way around, and then I went over the edge and back just to reinforce that edge. So now we can remove this pin. And some people ask, why do I sew on the bottom since it is a fold? partly just to finish it and give it a little bit more stability, because I don't see the need to put any kind of interfacing in here because the notepad and the crayons keep it pretty solid, but this does help with that a little bit. And it also helps the crayons just kind of stay up a little bit, because you need this fold to be big enough to keep your notepad in place, but not so big that you can't see the crayons. So it can be a little bit of a quandary. Now it is time to do our markings. That means you need to make a decision. Do you want your notepad to be stored like this, where the whole notepad is in the pocket? Or do you want just this back cardboard to be in the pocket and the rest to be out, so that it's just easy for the kids or whoever to flip through that? Totally personal preference. If you want it this way, you're going to have the cardboard in here, and then you're just going to take your ruler, go maybe 1/8 of an inch past the cardboard, and then you're going to just draw a line down the pocket so you know where to sew to make this pocket for the notepad. If you had made a different choice, you can see this stitch line wouldn't work. If you wanted it to be totally tucked in, you're going to want to sew 3.5 for a snug fit, or 3 3/4 for an easier fit from the seam, not the edge, because if you go from the edge, it might be a little bit too tight to get your notepad in. So this is our first stitch line that we're going to do. Now we are going to make little pockets for the crayons, just like this. And for that, I want you to start from this edge, because sometimes there's not quite enough space in between the notepad to put an extra crayon, and you want to make sure if you have any extra weird amount of space, you want it near the notepad, not over here. I just turn it over, and again, you're going to start your marking from the seam line, not from the edge. And you're going to mark 1 inch. This is what 1 inch looks like. It's nice and roomy. If you want to get more crayons in there and you want it to be a little bit more of a snug fit, you could do like 3/4 of an inch, but I like to do 1 inch myself. And then you're just going to draw 1 inch increments off of the previously drawn line, and see how easy it is to see these lines because they're made with this pen. Okay, so see, we have a weird amount. No crayons fitting in there, but we're going to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 over here. So this is why you measure from this side for your notepad and this side for your crayons. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine. I'm going to remember to hit record, and I'm going to show you how we are going to finish putting these stitch lines, and then all that will be left is adding our notepad and our crayons. I put 2 pins just to make sure this stays nice and flat as I'm sewing these lines. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew in U shapes just to save time. If you want to, you can start and stop on each individual line, but I'm going to start up here, go down. I'm going to go right along that same stitch line and then go back up. So then I'm only starting and stopping a few times. And each time you start, you definitely want to pull up that bobbin thread, because your bobbin is going to be on the outside of this project. And you're going to want to go beyond the fold, just like 2 stitches, just again, to reinforce it when people are putting crayons in and out. Now you'll notice I'm about to sew up onto the loop a little bit, which is totally fine, but that's why we put that loop on before we sewed these channels. Now we need to get these lines off of the fabric. And all you need to do is heat up your iron. Look at that. I'm like a child. This amuses me every time. See, all that is left is to add our notebook and our crayons. So we had decided to have it go like that, and that's perfect size. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to easily make little tic-tac-toe bags that are drawstring bags with French seams. It sounds a lot more complicated than it is. It's very similar to this drawstring bag. This is one of my most popular videos, and they're super fast because we just used pinking shears so that it wouldn't fray on the sides instead of doing the French seam. The French seam is basically one more step, but for something like a game bag, there's no way it can fray because those raw edges are encapsulated inside. And so I think this is a little bit of a step up in durability from this. So what we're going to need for this is fabric. We're going to cut 2 pieces that are 5 by 7. You're going to want contrasting thread to do your lines. You can either do straight stitch and just make them a little more subtle, or you can use your zigzag or any decorative stitches, however you want to do that. Since I've already made 2 white ones, I'm going to try red and we'll make the grid in white just for something different. Then you need 5 playing pieces in 2 different colors for the game. Now, this is going to be the perfect gift for all kinds of occasions. A cute little Valentine, great stocking stuffer. It could be a little Halloween gift. It could be a birthday party favor. It could be a Hanukkah game, a Hanukkah gift, 4th of July. You could use them for Easter. They would be a lot of fun with candy in them. You know, you see these games like, oh, play tic-tac-toe with M&Ms. But if kids are anything like me, they're going to run out of pieces pretty quickly because they're going to end up in their stomach. So I would recommend doing buttons or something else in addition to candy if you're going to be putting them in an Easter basket or making it a Valentine gift, etc. Then we're going to need the basics: rotary cutter, self-healing mat, ruler. You're going to need some thread. We're going to need 2 pieces, 15 to 20 inches long. I always say a little bit longer is better so you can tie them. We're going to need a safety pin to run that through, and sewing machine and iron. So I think we are ready to get started. So I just took a scrap of red that I had, and I'm going to cut 2 pieces that are 5 inches by 7 inches. Because this is a solid, it doesn't matter what direction I cut it. Now we have our 2 pieces. This is the front and the back of the bag. The back is just going to be plain, so we're going to move that aside. Now we need to line this up and mark where we're going to sew the tic-tac-toe grid. So line it up with the lines on your cutting mat. We're going to go 1 1/4 inches up. So I use my ruler, and it is 5 inches across. So we're going to go 2 inches over from each side. And we're going to make a little mark with pencil or a heat erasable pen on the 4-inch and the 3-inch if you have it lined up on the 1 and the 6, because our grid is going to be 1 inch. So we want to make sure that is right there. Then we're going to measure 2 1/4 up from the bottom. And we're going to line these sides up on the 6 and the 1 inch again. And this is going to be our horizontal line. So we're going to draw from the 5 to the 2 inch. So that will give us our 3 columns 1 inch wide each. Then we're going to go 1 inch up from that line. We're going to draw that again. We're going to start at the 2 1/4. We're going to go 3 1/4, 4 1/4, 5 1/4. Then we're going to go over 1 inch, and we're going to do the same thing. So now we have our tic-tac-toe grid drawn on there. And it might look like it should be more centered, but you want it down because this is going to be folded and folded to become the casing. You also want to be able to close it with the drawstring and know what's in there. You're not necessarily going to play the game with that drawstring closed, but you want to know what that design is on the outside. So now we're going to go to the sewing machine and we're going to sew those lines. I'm just going to use a white thread and sew on these 4 lines. And I'm going to pull my bobbin thread up for each one. It takes, a couple more seconds, but it makes it so you're not going to have a big old bird's nest on the inside of your bag, because you will see the stitching on the inside of this bag. So I hold these 2 threads tightly while it makes a knot, or while you go forward and back a few stitches, and then just sew to the end. Now, when I did the zigzag version, I did find that my fabric didn't stay quite as flat when I was sewing it because it was going back and forth and puckering a little bit. So I would recommend either starching your fabric before you do that so you have a little bit of a firmer surface, or maybe adding a stabilizer or a lightweight interfacing to the back. For doing straight stitches, you can sew right on your fabric as is. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to mark the top part of the fabric that we're going to use for the drawstring so that we don't sew all the way up. So we're going to mark down 2 inches, just put a little mark that'll be in that seam allowance on either side. Now, because we are doing a French seam, we are going to have wrong sides together the first time we sew around this. It feels weird because whenever you make a bag, you're used to sewing right sides together, but this is how we're going to do it. Flip or pin it in place so that the fabric doesn't shift. Now we are going to sew from this point down here, across and up, starting and stopping at these 2-inch marks, 1/8 of an inch from the edge. I changed my thread to match my fabric. It doesn't really matter for doing the French seam, but I want it to just match when we do the drawstring, so I usually just change it after I have sewn my grid. Now you'll notice I am sewing with the edge of the fabric halfway on this foot. So this is a 1/4 inch foot. So if my fabric goes right along the edge, it's a 1/4 inch. So I want it to be about half of that. So we're sewing quite close to the edge. Now I stopped and I'm gonna pick up my foot and I'm gonna turn at a 45-degree angle and I'm gonna take 1 stitch. I'm gonna take 2, lift it and turn. Having that angle at the corner is going to make the corner turn and have a slightly better point than if we just went straight and pivoted. And you either do 1 or 2 depending on where you stop. Next step, I'm going to trim those corners. I'm going to cut it at that angle and then just a little bit on either side. It's usually better if you only do 1 angled stitch and not 2, but I hadn't stopped quite far enough down, so we're just going to see what happens. Now we are going to turn it the opposite way. Basically, we're going to turn it inside out. This is the key to making a French seam. You have the raw edges on the right side with the right side showing. Then you turn it inside out. I'm going to use this cute little flamingo turning tool. Just very gently push those corners, and that gives us a much better corner than normal because I did that angled stitch. Now you're going to want to make sure you take a minute and make sure this seam is on the very edge, because if it isn't pushed out really well and pressed, this next step isn't going to work well, because what we're going to do is we're going to sew a 1/4 inch from this edge. And because our last stitching was 1/8 of an inch, all of those raw edges should be on the opposite side of the stitching. And that is what makes it a French seam, because it encapsulates the raw edges. And as I was working on this, I was wondering, like, why is this called a French seam? Is it really French? And they believe that it was French tailors and seamstresses that started using this technique a lot in clothing in the 1600s. So it's just always been called a French seam. You don't have to worry about pressing anything above where we sewed. Just make sure you get this pressed really nicely. You can use a tailor's clapper if you want. Now, before we go back to the sewing machine, we want to make sure that where we started and stopped is even, because you don't want one side up here and one side down here. You're going to have a angled drawstring. You want everything to be folding down evenly. So I'm going to fold that down. So I have this lined up, and then I'm just going to check and make sure this folds evenly, and it does. It's about 1/8 of an inch above this solid line. And then let's just check this side. So those are nice and even. So we did a very good job starting and stopping at the lines. Back to the sewing machine. Okay, I sewed down that side and forgot to film it, a 1/4 inch from the edge, starting at the mark. Now, because we're not going to be clipping these corners, they're not going to be perfect points, but we don't want to cut through the stitching that we originally did. So I'm just going to come down and pivot 90 degrees instead of doing the angle. Now, one thing that is a little bit different about doing a French seam in a bag versus French seams on clothing is on the clothing, they might press this and then sew this down. That's kind of where you get that fold and you have the stitching on both sides, and that will make it flat. For something this size, that's going to be pretty impossible. So this is just going to be a little bit of bulk inside the bag, but it is going to make sure we don't have a lot of fraying and that this bag is going to last a good long time for lots of tic-tac-toeing. Now I'm going to turn it right side out. I'm going to go back to the workstation. I'm going to use my turning tool again, and if you don't have one of these, you can use a pencil that isn't sharp, you could use a chopstick, you could use a pen that isn't opened. You just want something that doesn't have a sharp point, but is pointy enough to really help you push that fabric out. But you want to do it really gently and slowly so that you don't end up pushing through the fabric or through the seam and having to start over. All right, so I got those out pretty much as well as I can because we have all that fabric in those corners. Now we are going to press these seams out just like we did the last time. Let me know in the comments what you think you will make these for. There's just so many things we can do with them. Now it is time to prepare our drawstring channels. And by channel, I mean that's where the drawstring is going to go through. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn it the opposite way again. We actually could have done that before we ironed. And you're going to take small scissors and you're going to very carefully clip up here the seam just above the stitching so that the part that isn't sewn can move and fold to both sides. You're going to do that on both sides. Now we are going to fold each side in so that it is parallel to the stitch line. So see, we have our stitching here and then it just keeps on going. So we're going to press that. So all four are folded in. Now we are going to open that up and we're going to fold that raw edge in again so that we're going to just sew right down that line and encapsulate that raw edge, kind of like we did with the French seam. So you're going to do that on all four. It's pretty skinny because we didn't want really thick French seams. If you watch the other video for the drawstring bags that were faster because we just did pinking shears, this part was a little bit wider because we did 1/2 inch seams and then did the pinking shears. So we had a 1/2 inch to work with up here, but for this one, we only have a 1/4 inch, but that's okay. It works out no problem. Now you're gonna take this top and you're gonna fold the one side back that is on the bottom so that we don't sew that. And we're going to sew straight down this side and straight down this side. Then we will turn it over and sew the other 4 sides as well. What this is going to do is going to keep those raw edges encapsulated so they are not going to bother us. And it is going to make it easier to get the pin and the drawstring through without messing up the fabric as the bag is opened and closed. You can of course use this method to make any kind of drawstring bag, just a plain drawstring bag, a game drawstring bag like we're doing with this tic-tac-toe, and any side. Now we still have the bag inside out to finish making the channel. So what I'm going to do is first I'm going to fold this down so that the raw edge is slightly below where we sewed. I'm going to finger press, well, I guess I can just press that, it's easier. I'm going to use my favorite little piece of wood, my tailor's clapper. The shorter ones are called a quilter's clapper. It's basically the same thing, just a different length. That helps press that and also cool that fabric off. And I'm going to turn it over and I'm going to fold it down so that this top edge matches. I'm more concerned about this matching than where the raw edge is. And then the next step is to turn that raw edge under about a 1/4 inch. The reason I do it after do the bigger fold is so that the bigger fold is consistent because, you know, you might do this side slightly smaller or bigger than the other side, and it's really the top that matters the most. Now I'm going to do the same thing on this side. So I have this one folded back, so we're not going to catch it, and we're just going to sew close to that folded edge on this side. And I did pull my bobbin thread up and knotted that. Now this is the right side, and so using the red thread just makes that really inconspicuous. If you wanted it to show up for whatever reason, you could use a white thread or a different color, but I just wanted it to blend with my fabric. Now I'm going to do the opposite. I'm going to fold this side we sewed down, and now we're going to sew this side. See right there, that little spot kind of folding out. So what I do is I just take my scissors and I tuck it under, so that it'll get caught in the sewing. And then I'm just going to hold that down so it stays in place while we sew. All the sewing is done. Now we're going to turn it right side out again. And this should be really easy because we already pressed it this direction. If you want to press it again, you can. Now we're done with the iron as well. Now all that is left is putting our strings in. So because this is string and it's 2 pieces twisted together, I'm going to put a knot in it and put the pin through right by the knot. If you don't knot it, the thread's just going to come apart and it's not going to stay to be threaded through there. Then I'm going to cut about 16 inches. We're going to need 2 pieces, but I'm going to knot each of them first. Now I'm just going to start on either side, push it through the one side, turn it around, push it through the next side, like that. Take the pin off, And then I usually tie the knot pretty close to the edge because once you pull it, it gets pretty long. So if you have it long to start with, like when this is laying flat, it's gonna be really long. So I try and get it, within an inch. So I tied both of those together in a knot, and then I'm just gonna trim past that knot. So one side is done. Now we're gonna do the same thing, and we're gonna start on this side. And this time we're gonna start on the opposite side from where the other string started and stopped, because you wanna have the strings on both sides so you pull like that to open and close it. Remember to pull your bag fully open and flat before you tie your strings, because if it was kind of like that and you tied it here, then it would never open all the way. And especially if you're going to play tic-tac-toe on there, you want it to lay flat while you're playing the game. Trim that knot, and it is done. So to close it, you just go like that. Open it, you just pull on the fabric. So all we need are our buttons, which we had at the beginning when we were going over supplies. 5 pink and 5 white, because that will show up well on the red. But now it's really easy. Play tic-tac-toe. So you just want to make sure you have 5 of each color for the game. And then if it's going to be a gift, you might want to add candy or something else in there. It is that simple. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how easy it is to whip up cute little gift bags for Valentine's Day with a clear heart window that we're going to make out of a page protector. You can use scraps of fabric of any kind of print. You're gonna need something to tie it closed. I'm using a little bit of rickrack. You can use ribbon, embroidery floss, whatever you want. The little heart template, and you can get that for free. Just look for the link below. 2 pieces of fabric, 4.5 by 7 inches. And then you can either use pinking shears or a pinking rotary blade. We're gonna need some clips, scissors to cut the page protector. Do not use your fabric scissors on that. Then we're gonna need some fabric scissors and a little bit of Scotch tape. Let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut the heart out of one of our pieces of fabric. So we're going to fold that in half and just finger press it. We don't want it to stay folded, but we need to be able to cut our heart out. Then I'm going to fold the heart in half as well. I'm going to put the bottom point 1.5 inches up from the bottom, and the fold of the heart is on the fold of the fabric. Now you could pin that on there, but because it is so small, I usually don't, and hearts are forgiving. I just hold it with my thumb, and then you're gonna take some fabric scissors and cut around that shape. Okay, now we have a heart cut out, and you have a heart left over for another project. I'll just put that to the side. Next, we need to work on our clear window. That's what's going to let the person receiving this gift see what's inside, candy or something else. I cut the page protector into about 3-inch strips. You don't have to be super precise because we are going to trim it after it's sewn on there. So it's about a 3-inch square. And you can place it over top of your heart just to make sure it's going all the way over those edges. And if you're going to be making a bunch of these, I would say just cut your page protector into as many of those squares as you can and have them at the ready. Just mass produce. Cut your fabrics, cut your hearts, cut your squares. Next, we are going to place the plastic square right on top of that fabric on the wrong side. This is a solid, so there's really no right or wrong. But if you do have a print, you want to tape the plastic on the wrong side of the fabric. And I usually just put 2 little pieces of tape just to hold that in place. Now we're going to take it to the sewing machine and stitch around the heart opening. I've tried this both ways, and I have found the easiest way to get it sewn pretty well around that heart is to put the plastic on the bottom and the fabric opening on the top. Then you're just going to want to sew pretty close, and I'm just going to sew about 1/8 of an inch from that edge. I'm also going to be using a small stitch length, 1.5, so that we're going to have our best results sewing on that curve. And just go slowly, and if you need to pick your presser foot up and move it to get the curve, then just keep doing that. I want to show you these 2 examples. This is the first one that I did, and I used a contrasting thread, but I didn't like how you could really see that it wasn't as perfectly straight around the edges of that heart. So now I use a coordinating thread, so it isn't as obvious. I'm not going to worry about it not being super precise because, again, this is just a quick gift bag with a window. It's not one that is going to be an heirloom, and I don't think anybody is going to really examine your stitching. If you want to try and be a lot more accurate, you go for it, but I'm going for quick. Now I'm just going to take scissors, not fabric scissors, just regular scissors, and I'm going to trim off some of this plastic. Probably isn't necessary, but I just feel like a little less of that plastic in there is going to make the bag more supple. Now we're going to put these right sides together, and I'm going to have the side with the window on top. I'm going to line it up on the markings of my board, and I'm going to put a little mark, a 1/2 inch down from the top. We only want to sew to a 1/2 inch from the top since we're going to be using pinking shears to trim the top so that it's super quick. Now I'm just going to put a few clips. So we're going to sew the 2 sides and the bottom, making sure that we start and stop at those marks that we made a 1/2 inch from the top. Can you believe it? We are almost done. Now I'm just going to use pinking shears or this pinking rotary cutter and trim all the way around all 4 sides. It's going to prevent large frays like this inside the candy bag, and then it's also going to make the top really cute and finished without having to do a lot of work. So let me show you how each of these works. These are just regular pinking shears, so it's going to give a triangular shape. I'm just going to cut straight across the top. If you haven't seen these before, these are my favorite. They're by Fiskars. They're really easy on your thumb. I think they're called Easy Action Pinking Shears, and I will have a link below the video if you want to get a pair of those. I do use these a lot when I'm clipping corners and other projects. But you can also get a rotary blade that is wavy. And so it does the same basic thing, but it's going to cut more of a wavy shape than the triangular shape, but it is going to prevent fraying. So what I do is I put my ruler down just over that stitch line because I want to make sure I don't slip and cut my stitching. And then just like a regular rotary blade, we're just going to cut, and it's getting a little bit dull to get a new one. So see, it's triangular there and wavy on this side, but the rotary cutter, especially when it's nice and sharp, mine's older, is so fast. You never want to leave all that fuzz on your mat because you don't want it to get into the grooves. That will make your mat last as long. Now we're going to turn it right side out and just try not to crumple the plastic too much. You want to do most of the turning from the fabric side that doesn't have the plastic because it will wrinkle a teeny bit. See, it gets some little bends, but nobody is going to notice it when they're looking through that window at whatever is inside. So let me know in the comments what you would put in a little gift bag like this. I am going to grab these little fun-size candies. 6 fit in there really nicely. The reason this heart has to be down and not really centered is because you need to have room to pinch this and tie it shut and still have the heart shape, because if it was down too low, it would start to warp the heart window. I cut about 8 inches of rickrack, and I'm just going to tie that. You could just do a single or a double knot. Rickrack doesn't tie in a bow very well. If you want a bow, I would recommend using ribbon of some sort. Then I'm just going to take my scissors, trim those ends a little bit, and voila, it's done. You can do these in 10 minutes or less once you get started. And if you wanted to do a bunch, as I said, you can just mass produce. Cut all your fabrics, cut all of your plastic squares, cut your rickrack, and just get sewing. So I hope this is a fun activity or little gift bag for you to make for Valentine's Day. I would love to know who you're going to give these to, how you're going to use them. Or is it going to be for a school party, for coworkers, for kids, grandkids? Let me know in the comments. I love to know how people use different projects that I post. And be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss a thing. If you love projects like this and you'd rather have an ad-free experience and some exclusive content as well, be sure to check out my membership site at sewwithtarareed.com. You can try it for $1 for a week, look around, see if it's for you, and then decide if you want to continue on monthly or with an annual plan. I hope you join me over there. It is lots of fun. If your lip balm knows how to hide in your purse, as well as a dog that doesn't want to go to the vet, then you need to watch this tutorial and learn how easy it is to make a cute lip balm holder. These are so convenient, and when you use the key fob hardware, you can attach your key to it too. You can hook it in your purse, hook it onto your water bottle, anything with a hook. But before we get started, my name is Tara Reed. I am an artist and fabric designer with Riley Blake Designs. Be sure to click subscribe if you haven't already, and make sure you click that little bell so YouTube knows that you want to know when I post new videos, which is about weekly. So let's dive into this and get our lip balm under control. Let's dive into how easy it is to make a lip balm holder with fabric interfacing and a 1-inch key fob. What you're going to need to start is a 15-inch
by 2¼ inch strip of fabric and also the same size fusible interfacing. And I am using the 911 fusible featherweight interfacing from Pellon. Then a pen or a heat resistant pen. You can use a regular one if you need to. Your key fob hardware. I highly recommend getting the pliers. It makes it much easier, but if you need to, you can use a hammer to close that if you don't want to invest in this. But key fob holders are one of my favorite things, so I recommend you invest in it. So let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to put the interfacing on the wrong side of our fabric, and the interfacing, you know which side is which, because one side you can see, I don't know if you can see the little bumps, that is the part that fuses or melts to your fabric. So that part needs to be down, and then it's smooth on the other side. If you do it backwards, you're going to put a bunch of glue gunk on your iron, not the best. So you're going to put it down like this and line those up. And then, because every once in a while you make a mistake and you do it backwards, right? Tell me I'm not the only one. You can also use a pressing cloth, which you can buy these that are specifically pressing cloths. It's just a thin piece of cotton. I like it because you can see through it often. And you can put that over top. So if for some reason some of the fusible material gets between the fabric and your iron, it's going to go onto this pressing cloth and not onto your iron. So I'm going to get that done and then show you what to do next. Now I have the interfacing ironed onto the back side of the fabric, and that's just going to give us a little bit more stability with our fabric and our little holder when we're done. Now we're going to fold it in half and match these ends. Fold that down and either put a pin in it to make sure this part doesn't slide while we do the next part, or I sometimes just do a clip at the bottom, just depending on what I have. We're going to line this up. So see, each of these thicker lines, that's 1 inch. So we want to center this fabric on a 1 inch increment. And because we did 2¼ it's going to be just shy of each of these little dotted lines. Okay, so there's our 1 inch. Now I'm going to make a mark 1/4 inch to each side of that 1 inch, because we're going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam. What we're trying to do right now is to figure out the angle to cut this so that the tip is the same width as your 1 inch key fob hardware. We could leave it out and it could just go like that, but I just think it looks more finished this way and it doesn't take a lot more work. So we make a mark and then about 3/4 of an inch down on each side. Then you're just going to draw a little line, make sure it stays together, and you're just going to cut. Now we're going to take it to the sewing machine and we're going to sew down each of the angle and each of the long sides. Leave this end open for turning using a 1/4 inch seam. Now we're going to turn this right side out and we're going to use this cute little flamingo turning tool to make sure the angle there and the points are out. All right, now I got it most of the way out. Now I'm just going to gently run this along that seam at the top, so we get that 1 inch part out. And I just kind of roll the seams to make sure it's all out nicely. Flatten it as much as I can with my fingers. Then we're just going to iron that flat. Now I'm just going to take it back to the sewing machine and either do a quick zigzag, or you can just do a straight stitch right close to that. It's going to be inside. So this part right here is going to be deep in here. So if you want to just do a straight stitch, you can. And that's what I'm going to do, and I'll be right back. So I just did a straight stitch there because it's going to stop that from fraying. It's going to be inside, and I did not feel like changing my presser foot. Now, this part is really important if you have directional fabric, which I do. You can tell more from a bigger piece. See, most of the fruit looks good this way, and it looks upside down this way. So you want to make sure it doesn't look upside down when you're done your holder. You want these grapes going the direction that it hangs, if that's what ends up on here. So you're going to do it like this and look. These are backwards, so we're going to turn it over this way. So this is going to be the front. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to fold this up 1 inch. Just use this handy dandy little ruler. Fold that up 1 inch. Press that So we're sewing a 1/4 inch from this folded edge, but I'm going to turn it over because the underside when you do the knot and everything sometimes looks a little bit worse. So we're going to make sure this looks really good from the top because this will be the side that we see. And then we're going to turn it back so that the raw edge is up, and this is going to be the front because the fruit is right side up. Now we're going to turn it up about 2.5 inches. But before I sew that, I always check, grab your favorite lip balm, shout out to Burt's Bees. So I always check to make sure that when it goes in, it's going to stick out a little bit so that it's easy to grab in and out of this holder. I'm just going to clip both sides. Now, one thing to be careful of is sometimes this raw edge like sticks out on the corner. So just make sure you tuck that in as you sew around. I am using a Janome sewing machine with a 1/4 inch walking foot, and I find it works a lot better than the traditional foot, even if it's a walking foot, because this 1/4 inch has like one walker that's right in the center, whereas the other one has it on both sides and it only grabs one side of the fabric when you're sewing really close. So if you have that option, make sure you use it. Now we're just going to sew all around here about 1/8 of an inch from the edge, and you're going to double back where this meets just so it's more secure because that's going to be the area that gets the most use, putting your lip balm in and out. I don't know if you can see this. I'm seeing a little bit of that edge, so I'm just going to tuck that under with my scissors before I sew over that. All that's left is to go add the key fob. The last step is to attach our hardware, which is basically a piece of metal, and it's got these little, I don't know, triangles that are going to dig into and attach to the fabric to keep that nice and secure. And it comes with a key ring. And there's a link below the video to find them on Amazon if you are on my YouTube channel or my website. So it's going to line up like that. So you can either do it like that and put it in to the pliers. I highly recommend the pliers. If you don't have any, what you're going to do is you're going to line this up, put a little piece of fabric over there and gently hammer it. Put fabric on there so that you don't dent or scratch the metal and so that it'll still look good. But I love key fobs, definitely worth the pliers. And this is what I've learned over the years of doing key fobs. The easiest way to do it is to set your hardware in your key fob first, and then gently close it so it'll hold, right? So it holds there. Then take whatever you're putting into it and put it in and double check on both sides to make sure it's lined up with the top so it looks nice and professional. And then you simply squeeze. And that's it. It is done. It is ready for your lip balm.
Let's make cute little fabric envelopes. They are the perfect size for gift cards, for cute little notes, carry a bunch of credit cards if you don't want to carry a big old wallet, whatever you want. Now, I love doing them where they have the shape of an envelope. You can also make them where it is straight across, which requires a teeny bit less cutting, but I think it's going to be worth it. I'm going to show you how to do it. And then also these stitch lines that really give that envelope feel. So let's first look at the supplies. The way I have designed these mini envelopes, you can make them out of 10-inch fabrics. So if you have 10-inch pre-cuts, you can use 2 of them and you can make 2 envelopes, or you can take 2 pieces of 5 inches by 10-inch fabric to make these. I just thought some of us have these hanging around, so I would make it so that you have something really efficient to use all of this fabric. Next, you're going to need the template, and this is a free template. If you are on my email list, you can go sign up. It'll automatically be emailed to you. If you're not on my email list, you can sign up. You'll need to click a double opt-in confirmation to make sure no one else is signing you up for my email list, and then you will get this. I'm going to be using a lightweight interfacing. I'm a big proponent of using what you have on hand, which is why I am using this featherweight interfacing. You can use whatever you have. You want it to give a little bit of body to your envelope, but you don't want it to be too stiff or too thick. Then you're going to need some pins, a pencil, something to help turn corners. I have this little turning tool. You could use a chopstick. You could use a pencil, whatever you want. I'm going to be using pinking shears to make the stamp. You can close it a few different ways. I'm going to show you how to use the cam snaps because they're fun and I love them. If you don't have them, don't want to get them, you can also just use a little scrap of Velcro to do that closure. You could also do a buttonhole and sew on a button. That's totally up to you. Then you need your basics, ruler, mat, rotary cutter. So let's get started. As I mentioned in the supplies section, you can make 2 envelopes out of 2 10-inch pre-cut pieces of fabric, or you can use scraps of fabric that are each 5 inches wide by 10 inches high. And if you are using directional fabric, you want it to be wide by high and you need the direction going like this. I'll talk more about direction in a minute. I'm going to show you how to do it with the 10-inch. You'll figure out how to do it with the 5-inch. So you can put your interfacing on the back of either side. I usually put it on whatever fabric I'm going to use for the lining, just because if you don't adhere it perfectly and it gets a little bit wrinkled, you won't see it as much on the inside. But hopefully we're going to do a good job. Now I have this interfacing and I cut it slightly smaller than 10 inches. Well, you'll see quite a bit smaller than 10 inches, but because this is going to be on the inside, I decided I did not want to run to the store and get more interfacing. I'm just going to piece this together and no one is ever going to know. So I have put this face down. You can feel the bumps or sometimes it's shiny depending on what product you're using. You want that next to the back of your fabric because that is what is going to fuse or stick to your fabric. You do not want it to fuse to your iron. Then you're going to read the directions on the back of your product. And this one says to cover with a damp cloth. And I can't find my pressing cloth at the moment, so I'm just going to use 2 pieces of white fabric so I can still kind of see where my square is. And it says to dampen it. So this is just a mister bottle with water. They're really handy for ironing. You can get them on Amazon. I have my iron set to wool, and then it says to press down for 10 seconds to fuse this. So we're just going to hold this down and move across the fabric. Now I'm going to lift and press every time I move. I'm not going to slide the iron like I am ironing a shirt because we don't want that interfacing to slide at all because it really was close to the edge of the fabric and I don't want to all of a sudden fuse it to my ironing board mat. So as you can guess, if you're working with fabric scraps, you would have just cut a piece of interfacing that was 5 inches by 10 inches and adhered it to the back of one of your fabrics because we're using these 10-inch squares. I just did it all at once. So I'm going to put these together. I'm just cutting them in half, so it really doesn't matter if they're right sides together because we're going to be moving them again. Grab my ruler, put that 5-inch line right along the edge. Make sure I have that nice and straight. Cut that in half. And now I have fabrics to make 2 envelopes from those 2 pieces. Well, 3 because I did it before 2. The next step is to cut with our template. And if you didn't get the free template, that's totally fine. You can just cut a point on one end and then you can cut this shape or you can do straight on the other end. Now, the tricky part and the part that seems kind of weird is if you're going to be using a directional fabric, the point needs to be at the bottom of the fabric, not at the top. See, so the direction's going this way and we're going to put this down here. If it's just a random toss, it doesn't matter at all which end each of the templates goes on, but let me show you why. It is because when this becomes the outside or the lining, it's going to fold up like this and fold down like this to be the flap. So you want to make sure this flower on the flap is right side up and not upside down. So this is right side up, that's right side up, that's going to be upside down, but we're not going to worry about that. We're keeping this simple. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to place this template, and I'm just doing it on the fabric that does not have the interfacing. Grab a ruler and I'm going to cut those 2 angles. So the point is cut, and now we need to do the bottom. You can either put it like this and pin it and cut all 3 of those lines, but what I like to do that's a little bit faster and easier is to fold this in half and just finger press that so it's flat. And then I fold my template in half and I put the fold on the fold and the point matching the bottom of the fabric. And then I'm just going to pin that and cut that by hand. Now, if you do have a cutting machine and you like to use your cutting machine for fabric, like a Cricut or a Scan and Cut Silhouette, there is an SVG file that you can get. It is with the written tutorial that you can get on Etsy, or they are free for anyone that is a member of my Sew with Tara Reid membership program, which you can try for $1. So I will put a link below this video so you can see that. You could jump in, grab this, grab that SVG file, see what else is in there and decide if that is for you. But there we go. Now we have that shape. So you can either cut that shape on a cutting machine or just quickly cut that by hand. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to put these right sides together, and the orientation doesn't matter because the inside is non-directional. And then I'm going to pin this. Now, a lot of people would cut both of them and then pin them together, but I don't, because you're going to have to do a lot of trimming after you sew these together, and it just saves a step. And then if things aren't matching absolutely perfectly because you've hand cut, it is not going to be a problem. I keep the pins pretty far in, so I'm not going to have to take them off as I'm sewing 1/4 inch from each side. Now, one other tip, and this is great if you're teaching somebody to sew, or I actually still do it all the time myself, is when you have these really deep points, I take a ruler and I draw with pencil where that 1/4 inch is. And I love this ruler because this blue line is exactly 1/4 inch. So it is really quick and easy to get that lined up. I get the inside of the blue lined up with the edge of the fabric. And so I just do a few of these lines where I know I'm going to need to pivot. And you could do this before you put the pins in. Might be a little bit easier, but I didn't. I forgot. So you don't have to do it all the way around, just where you're going to be pivoting your needle while you're sewing. This is really, really helpful when you're teaching people to sew, teaching kids to sew. It gives them a lot more confidence to know what they're doing, because even experienced sewers, sometimes when you get to weird points like this, you think you know where you need to turn, you lift your needle, you pivot, and you realize you're a little further than 1/4 inch, and so you have to put it down, go back again, which isn't a huge deal, but it can be a cause of stress for people who are new. So when I was teaching my niece, she really liked doing this when we did a project. So it takes, a minute or two to just draw those lines. And now we're going to take it to the sewing machine and we're going to sew all the way around with 1/4 inch. And we're going to leave a few inches open on the straight side down towards the point, but not too close because we want to be able to turn that nicely. So there and there. So now we're going to head to the sewing machine. Even though my machine will do a knot for me, whenever I am sewing at the beginning or at the end, when I know I'm going to be turning something right side out, I always go forward and backward just so that there's a little bit more stability to that section and it's not going to rip open when I'm turning my project. So now you'll see how easy that was, that I could just stop on that line, lift the foot, pivot or turn my fabric, and then I'm going to put the foot back down so that it is lined up with this edge, and we're going to keep on going. Now we're just going to remove these pins and we're going to trim and cut our corners. So I like to cut my corners nice and deep, especially these, because they are so tight. Getting all of this fabric inside this little section is going to make it really hard to turn that corner well. I will say though, that you're not going to get a perfect point, whatever you do. It's going to be a little bit bubbled, but that's okay because it's on the inside. So I clipped those points. And then I'm just going to cut right along where the white fabric is cut. So I'm going to cut that back off, or the lining. Then I'm going to cut those two corners. Now it's also important to trim here so that this is going to turn and give us a nice straight area on the envelope. So what I do is I take my scissors and I cut straight in to each of those pivot points. And then I just cut kind of at an angle on both sides, because that is going to ease up that fabric so that when we turn and press it, it's going to press really nicely. Then we're going to do the same thing up here. I do 2 cuts. Make sure you don't cut your stitching whenever you're cutting corner. So you'll see we had so many cuts to do with the corners that it was just as easy, actually easier and faster, to cut the rest of this lining off now instead of cutting it into the shape. So next we just need to turn this right side out, and you want to get it as as right side out as possible with your fingers before you use a turning tool. So I always rub my finger along the seams, just kind of press that out as best I can. These bottom corners obviously are going to need a bit of help. I'm going to grab my turning tool, and again, if you don't have one, you can use the tip of a pen. Make sure the pen isn't open because you don't want to draw on your fabric. You could use a chopstick, something that has a point but isn't super pointy, because you don't want it to poke through, especially since we cut pretty close to those seams. If you really, even if I really jabbed this hard, I could poke this through, which would be a bummer. We'd be starting over. Going to use my quilter's clapper. This is just a piece of wood, really easy to hold. It's unfinished. After you press this down. It takes the heat out of the fabric and also gives you a better crease than if you don't use one. I also love it because when you're steaming cotton, especially when you're on a smaller ironing board like this that is metal, this fabric gets really hot. So I like to do this not only for how well it helps press that, but it also makes it less hot for my fingers. Then here where we turned it, you just want to have that tucked under with the same seam allowance. So when we're done, nobody's going to know which side you turned. I'm going to use this for the outside, this for the inside. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this down and press that flat. Now you'll notice on the template, it has a line. So you can use that. You're just going to kind of put this up a little bit, like with the seam allowance, right? Because it's still a little bit wider. So you can do it this way. Put your ruler here, move that. You want it about a 1/2 inch down. And then you can fold that, move your ruler, do not iron on an acrylic ruler, and press. Or I was doing that on a different video and somebody told me about this cool product, because we all learn about things at different times, right? So she told me about the Clover hot ruler, and you can iron right on it. So what I do is I put this down and I make sure this line is even on the edges. This point is at that 1/2 inch, and then I can leave this here. I can press on there and do that. It's really cool. I like it for projects like this, but it's really, really handy for bigger projects where maybe you're doing a long strip of fabric and you need it folded down a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch. It's a fun little tool to have in your arsenal. So I just wanted to share that with you. Now we're going to unfold that, and you can see that crease. We're just going to fold this up and put these points to the crease and press. So now we have our shape, and if you just wanted it to be plain and you didn't want a stamp or an address or anything on the back, you would be good to go to sew this together. But we're going to do the whole shebang, so I'm going to show you how to do the stamp and the address piece next. We'll use this as an example. So for the stamp, I cut a 1 inch piece out of fabric, and I usually try and have something that I like in the center. This was cut out of this bottom section, so this is going to work really well. I'm just going to take that and I'm going to fussy cut it, which basically means I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to line that sunflower up inside a 1 inch square. And it's a little bit bigger than 1 inch, so I can either cut some of the petals off on either side, or I could off-center it like that and be artsy. I'm just going to kind of make it the whole center. So I'm just going to turn it and cut all 4 sides, making sure I'm lining it up so that it's going to be about a 1 inch square when we're done. So this is going to be the center of my stamp. So if you have white, I would use a color instead of white for this outer stamp section. So just go into your scrap fabrics. I happen to have the same fabric, and you're going to want a piece that is, or at least a 1/4 inch larger than your stamp all the way around. I'm just going to cut this really quickly and make it an odd shape and show you how it really doesn't matter, because when we make it into a stamp, it's going to be perfect. So we're going to sew that onto that. But before we do that, we're going to get our dress section ready. And I'm going to use this yellow again. So I'll have this stamp. Oh, it's going to be interesting. I've never done this in color. So I like to make this 1 inch high and about 2.5 inches long. So this is 2 1/4. That's just what it is. So that's going to be totally fine. So that stamp will be up there. This will be here. Now, there's a couple ways to do this. You can do it with stitching, and I'm going to show you that. Or another way is to use heat transfer vinyl if you have a cutting machine. And that's how I did this. So You would basically take your Cricut, Scan and Cut, Silhouette, whatever you have. You could do a name, you could say for you, whatever you want to do. You would iron that onto that piece of fabric and then sew that onto the envelope. So that's an option, but I'm going to show you the sewing method. So because I want this to be jiggly lines, I actually don't want that on the inside of the envelope. So I am going to sew that before I put it onto the envelope. It's a little harder because this is just one piece of fabric. It's so flexible. So you could either starch that to make it a little bit stiffer, or I am just going to put a little scrap of interfacing on the back to give it a little bit of body and help it to hold its shape while we stitch. Okay, so now we are going to go to the sewing machine. Now I'm just going to quickly sew all 4 sides of this little sunflower stamp image to the gold backing. And I am using a smaller stitch length. I'm using a 1.9, and I'm gonna not go all the way to the edge. And the reason I'm using a smaller stitch length is I wanna be able to fray that edge because I think it just gives a little fun look to my stamp. So you want to try and be a little more equal distant from the edge. This one is a little bit higher than the rest, but we're just going to wing it. And then I'm just going to take tweezers and I'm just going to pull some of these threads out. You can do it all the way around. Primitive little frayed look to it. And then it looks purposeful and not like a couple threads are coming out if you don't do it. See, it gives kind of a fun look. And then we'll cut the yellow in a minute. But first, we are going to just sew our address onto our label. And I usually just do 2. You always want to do a contrasting color fabric. If I did black, it would show up a lot more, but I'm just going to do white and see how that looks. And again, I'm using a small stitch length so that we can curve this a little bit more in this short distance. But before we sew these down, we need to trim our stamp. And I'm just going to do that right here so it's easy. So I keep little bowls by my sewing machine for threads. So I'm going to put that down so that I don't end up getting a bunch of little threads into my sewing machine since I've decided to do this right here. So I'm just going to take the pinking shears and I'm going to cut all 4 sides so that it really looks like a stamp and not just a square on a square. So there's our stamp. I do have links to all of the products below the video if there's anything that you decide, oh, I like that and I want that. So now I'm just going to place this stamp and I'm going to sew this on. Now, this time I am going to pull up the bobbin thread, which means I'm going to put the needle down while holding this thread, lift the needle, give a little tug, grab my tweezers. And I always use tweezers because if I use my fingers, I end up stabbing my finger a lot with that sharp needle. Put both threads under the foot and then I'm going to hold that as I start. That is going to avoid having one of those little bird nest knots created underneath your fabric. Now I'm going to place the address. So I'm just going to do the same thing, sew that on there. The next thing we need to do is draw the lines that we are going to sew to make it look like paper folded for an envelope. And you can do this a couple ways. You can use a pencil, you can use a heat erasable pen, you could even just put a little piece of tape as a guideline. I'm going to throw caution to the wind and I'm going to use one of these Frixion pens. They are supposedly not designed for fabric, even though they will go away with heat, but they might come back if the fabric gets too cold. I used them a lot for a while, then I learned that little fact. My Madame So dried up and I don't have a replacement, so we are going to throw caution to the wind because it's an envelope, for goodness sake. I don't think it's an heirloom thing that's going to be sticking around so long. So I have drawn the lines on those. Now, before I have always done colored outside. So I've always used white so that it shows up really nicely, like on this one. But because we're doing a white outside, I'm going to change my thread and I'm going to do gold because I want it to show up. So I'm just going to do a contrasting color to my fabric. Now I'm going to sew the paper line. I'm going to raise the bobbin thread and grab a hold of that so there won't be a big knot underneath because that will be inside my envelope. Then you just want to trim off those threads. And now we're going to sew the envelope closed. If you do Velcro, you need to put the Velcro on before you sew the pocket together because it's really hard to sew that on when this is already together. But because Velcro is so flat, you can sew all the way around once the Velcro is on. So I'll just walk you through how you would do Velcro if that is your choice. Okay, so if we were going to do Velcro, you would sew the soft or hook and loop. You would sew the soft side on the inside of the flap. Then you would fold this up. You would put this down, fold it up like this, to figure out exactly where the other side of the Velcro needs to go so that those two are going to match. Then you would open this back up and sew that on. That's if you're going to do Velcro. Then you would sew it all together. But I want to do a snap because they're super cute. So I am going to sew this together and then we're going to do the snap. I'm going to show you that that can work. And because this is folded, it's basically 4 layers of fabric when you get those seam allowances in there. You can see that my presser foot is really tilted. It's tilting up and flat on the back. To make it more even and move better when it gets started, I'm going to use leader fabrics. This is basically pieces of folded up fabric. And just squeeze these fabrics back under and put the presser foot down. Now the presser foot is flat and the feet have more to grab onto to get started. It just makes for smoother sewing. You don't have to do it. It's just something I wanted to share with you. So I'm just going to sew all the way around about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And doing this sewing is not only going to be sewing the pocket, but it is also going to sew this area shut where we turned this right side out. To finish this envelope up, we're going to add a snap to close it. And as I've mentioned before, these are called cam snaps. They are plastic snaps. They come in all kinds of colors, made in the USA, family-owned business. I love them. Haven't met the people, but I love the product and I love that it's a US-based company. I have a lot of different colors which are the circles, just like this. So it's just a circle snap. They also make cute little hearts and stars, and I don't know if they have any other shapes, but for this one, I'm just going to do a dot because I don't know. I liked the heart on the pink for Valentine's Day, but we're going to do a circle on this one, and I chose to use the gold. So what you need are 2 of these pointy pieces, and then you need female part is the innie, and the male part is the outie. You can think of it as a belly button. A 1/2 inch down from this point so that your snap is centered. But I want to show you how to really figure that out instead of just measuring, because sometimes maybe you stitched a little further from the edge. The main thing is you don't want this circle to be on this seam allowance where it's a little bit thicker. So you want to kind of feel in your fabric for how far up it needs to be so that it's going to be nice and flat and not tilted. So I'm going to say right there, which is a little bit more than that 1/2 inch. Not much, but a teeny bit. So I just put that there. And then put the awl, which is like an ice pick for fabric. Be very careful. It just pokes a hole in there. Then you're going to put the circle side with the point through the fabric on the outside. You're going to just use your fingers and push down. Make sure the fabric is down. And then you're going to take the female side or the outie belly button side, and put that on top. Now you're going to grab the press to put these on. The circular part is going to sit right in the divot of this black area. And then the outie or innie is going to sit on this white plastic part. So you're going to get that in there. And then I always just kind of turn it and investigate, make sure it's centered in there before I squeeze. Now, when I squeeze, what is happening is this is flattening the plastic point inside this piece so that that piece is connected and going to stay on there. So that's great. We have the outside. Now, how do we decide where to put this one? It's very simple. You take the snap, you fold it down, and you press. See how that leaves a circular mark right there? Outie snap part leaves a mark. You're going to take the awl and you're going to poke a hole in the center of that circle. Being really careful just to go a little bit in. Don't go through the front of your envelope. Make your hole. This time you're going to take the circle piece and you're going to go from the inside of the envelope, put it in there, press it down, put the other half on, and you're just going to repeat the process with this press to secure this half of the snap. And that is it. It's done. Look at how cute. So here are some examples. This one, I just did a stamp. I didn't do the address part. This one, I used my Cricut and used heat transfer vinyl. This one has a Velcro close and it has a sewn address, kind of like this one. And the stamp. You can definitely see that more because I used a darker thread than on this one. You just experiment as you go. And now these are ready to use. And remember, you can get the free template by signing up for my email, and that gives you the shape to cut here and this top point. If you're already on my email list, just fill out the form from the link and it'll get sent right to you. If you've never opted in before, you'll have an opt-in email and then you will get it sent right to you. If you are a member of my Sew with Tara Reid membership club, you can find the written directions, which includes the template, already in the membership at no extra charge. And if you want to try the membership and see what it's about, there is a $1 trial. For $1, you can try it for a week, see if it's for you. And there is a link to that below as well. Happy sewing.
Today, I'm going to show you another quick project that is great for stocking stuffers, gifts, girls' trips, family vacations, long plane rides, whatever. It's how to make a simple sleep or eye mask, depending on what you call it. And I'm going to show you how to make it where you fussy cut it to put exactly what you want on your mask, like I did with these snowmen, or to use just a more tossed pattern where it doesn't matter exactly where you put your template. What you need is this template, which is free on my website at tarareid.com/sleep-mask. Then, and this is about just slightly over 9 inches wide and 4.5 inches tall. So this is also a great project for some of your scraps. So I grabbed a piece of the snowman again, but with red. That's going to be the front. Then a polka dot for the back. You can make these, you can do these reversible too. It really doesn't matter which way, so that you could do it that way. You could do it that way. You're just basically flipping the elastic. So do two different things, so you have options. But I would recommend not doing anything too light, like a white background, especially if someone might have makeup still on their face. Then you need a piece of fusible fleece about the same size, and then a 14-inch piece of elastic. All right, so first let's talk about fussy cutting. So to fussy cut, you need to figure out exactly where you want your designs, and you're going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So if it goes over that selvage a teeny bit, it's still going to be okay. So I'm just going to angle that, and I'm just going to keep folding it up so I can see, make sure I'm not too much over the selvage, but that my snowmen are going to be on here and not hitting the seam allowance. Okay, so right like that. I'm gonna move that there. I like to cut it all together so the size is correct. So then I'm gonna, whoops, don't do that. A little overzealous, my flipping. Okay, then I'm gonna put my backing right side down, because I'm gonna make this, I'm gonna cut this as a sandwich the way it's gonna go, so that when we pin it together, it's going to be good sizing. And then I'm just gonna put that on top of all of it and pin it together. And it does tell you on the template what to cut, and then there's a test square, so you wanna make sure that is 1 inch by 1 inch before you do the project, because if you didn't choose cut actual size when you printed it, your printer might have made it a little bit smaller, and then you'll have a child size one. So now I'm just going to carefully cut around. All right, so we have that cut out. I'm just going to take the pins out. Okay, isn't that going to be cute how that ended up in the center? So now I'm going to take the fusible fleece. Oh, and I cut it so that it's going to fuse to the back. It doesn't really matter which way. And I'm going to take it over to the ironing board and just press and fuse that together. All right, so I have a different method where you're going to be able to make these really quickly if you're using just a toss pattern where it doesn't really matter what part of the print is going to be on your mask. So what I do in this case is I cut out the fusible fleece. So I cut out a bunch of the mask shape out of the fusible fleece, take some of my scraps of fabric and press the fleece onto the fabric before I cut the fabric. Then I'm gonna grab a fabric for the opposite side. I'm gonna put that face up. I'm going to put this face down. You also want that to not matter, so just to be a basic print. I'm going to put this face down, making sure that the whole mask is on this because this piece is obviously wider than that. And then I'm going to pin that together and cut it out. So you could do whole strips of them. Like if you had long strips, you could do 1, 2, 3, 4 and really create a little assembly line. Now that I fused the fleece to the backing, I'm going to put the right side up and I'm going to grab my elastic, and this is just going to be attached straight across. So I'm going to pin that. I'm going to pin it really close to the edge because I just want to double check. I mean, if you're making this for you or your family, always double check the size. Otherwise, 14 inches is a pretty good guess that it's going to work on most heads. But if you want to check the size, just pin it like that. And then I would do it this way so you don't, less likely to stab yourself. Very gently put that on your head to test, but we're going to assume that it's fine. So now there's 2 ways to do this. You can go and baste the elastic. But in the interest of time, I just will put the right side down on top and then hold that elastic in place, put this down, and make sure I pin through the elastic. And then I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I don't know, I'm all about time efficiency. I'm going to do that. And then you're just going to pin the rest of the way around. All right, then you're going to take it to the sewing machine. You're going to sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I usually double back on the elastic just in case, just to make it a little bit more secure, and leave a section of the flat part at the top open so that you can turn it right side out. Okay, so I left a section open for turning, but before you turn it right side out, you're just going to need to go around the curves and clip so that it's going to turn nicely and give you a smooth curve. And if there are parts that look a little bit thick, you can always trim that back a little bit. I might be a slightly overzealous trimmer, but I figure too much is better than none, and just make sure you're not getting too close or, heaven forbid, cutting through your stitch lines. So now that I have that all trimmed, I'm just going to very gently turn that right side out. And if you flip the fabric where you started and ended and then push through, you're going to put less strain on the edge of that sewing. All right, and then you can just use your fingers to puff that out, or you can use a turning tool. But it's pretty big. You can just rub your finger along that curve. And that is good to go. So now you just need to take it and press the edges and press this under so that when we top stitch, you're not going to see where it was left open. And be very careful not to press your elastic because it might melt. So now this is all pressed, so you can't really see where that opening was, and it is good to go. We're going to top stitch about 1/8 of an inch from the edge, and I put a dark red thread in the top and black in the bobbin so that whichever side you put out, you're not going to really notice that stitch line.
Now the big question is, what are you going to make first? Let me know in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss a thing.